So, hi everyone, I'm Krus from Linköping University, and I will talk about hydrogen power in vehicles. I'm from the division of Fluid and Mechatronic System at Linköping University, and here you see some of the applications and partners we work with. We work foremost with the HK, the hydraulic cluster here in Hudiksvall. And we also work with Saab Aeronautics in Linköping. We work with Volvo Construction in Eskilstuna and also Rock Drills Epiroc, formerly Atlas Copco in Eskilstuna. I think it's good to approach this kind of technology transition we are talking about through some kind of framework. And we have developed something called the requirements-based framework. And we define technologies in different zones there. So the technology comfort zone is where you already have a viable solution that you can take off the shelf. I mean, existing technologies are typically here, like the diesel engine is really in its technology comfort zone. However, it's pushed out there by the requirements of emissions and CO2. Now we are entering new technologies like electric powertrains, which might be more technology sensitive. We need to develop the technology further. It's really, and it might even be really critical. The whole function of the whole machine depends on that single technology to function at all. And of course, there are areas where a technology cannot even be used because we have reached the boundaries of that capability. Another thing that can be interesting to look at is the specific power of different power sources. That is, how many kilograms does it take to produce 1 kilowatt, or vice versa. For instance, a truck diesel can produce about 0.7 kilowatt per kilogram. A petrol engine is about 1 to 8 kilowatt, especially the high performance engines with turbo, etc. A turboshaft engine that you have in a modern turboprop aircraft is about 6 to 10 kilowatt per kilogram. An electric motor is between 1 and 10. It's 1 for an ordinary standard electric motor, but there are also very high power density motors with water cooling. A fuel cell that converts hydrogen power to electric power is about 0.4 to 0.8 kilowatt per kilogram at a system level. And that is, as you see, less than a truck diesel. By comparison, in 1932, a Pratt & Whitney air engine had about 1.2 kilowatt per kilogram. And that was in this record-breaking aircraft, the BG Racer. It has had a record of 476 kilometers per hour. But to achieve that, 50% of the empty weight of the aircraft had to be engine. By comparison, this Saab 340 commuter aircraft has a max speed of 502 kilometers per hour, but only 5% of its empty weight is engines. But that is because of these really high power densities, specific powers you get in the turboshaft engines. So if you look at specific energy, then we have that diesel is about the same as petrol and kerosene. It's about 12,600 watt-hour per kilogram. If you then compare it to a battery, the best batteries would be the Tesla at a pack level. That's 177 watt-hour per kilogram, which is so way below. Hydrogen is almost 3 times as high as diesel. But if you look at a pressurized hydrogen storage, you can only use 5 to 10% of the storage system weight to actually have for the hydrogen. you get better numbers with cryogenic storage where you have liquid hydrogen, but it's still maybe then at the same level as diesel. If we look at the efficiencies, then the truck diesel is about less than 50%, and the petrol engine is even less, maybe 25%. And a turboshaft engine can be up to 0.5, like 50%. An air engine flying at a very high altitude is very efficient. And electric motor can be almost 95%. A fuel cell is contrary to what some people think. It's not very efficient. It's at the same level as a combustion engine, 0.4 to 0.6, something like that, except for very low outtakes. But for weight reason and cost reason, you don't want to be you want to have a small fuel cell, and that means that you will end up ending up at an efficiency that is much lower. A battery, again, is quite efficient. It's not 100%, but it's quite efficient, though. But these are numbers you need to remember when you compare these different solutions. So if you say a fuel cell plus electric motor, that's comparable to a combustion engine. Now, electrification of trucks, that is something that is already happening. I think Volvo showed a new line of electric trucks just a couple of weeks ago. So that is really something that happened. And we could see that we already see that cars is rapidly moving into the technology comfort zone for batteries. The sales of battery cars is increasing with 50% per year in Sweden. So in about 10 years, we will have the majority of new cars will be electric, almost 100%. Long-haul trucks could be possible with batteries if you since you can only drive for 4.5 hours due to regulation and have a 45-minute rest. But it would require very high charging stations, and it's doubtful if you could really build this kind of electric network to be able to charge the many trucks that need to be charged. However, for short and medium range trucks, that would be really useful. I would say we are in the technology comfort zone there. But with the 40-ton long-haul truck, that would require like 2 to 4 tons of batteries, depending on reserves. But from a weight perspective, it would be acceptable, because if you have 40 tons, 4 tons is just 10% of the total weight. But there would be these other issues, also fire safety and all sorts of secondary requirements can be difficult to meet. But here, fuel cells could be an option, I think. And not only me, also Volvo and Daimler is already working very hard on realizing this in a joint venture. And also Scania is working on fuel cells for trucks. So hydrogen storage and fuel cells could be a viable options. System weight would be something between diesel truck and battery truck. There have been talks about electric roads. I don't think that's likely. There would be huge investments, like 60 to 100 billion Swedish crowns in Sweden. So it's probably not worth it. Construction machines. This is already happening also. Volvo showed their first electric wheel loader recently, and you can actually order it, make advance orders now. And I think we will see, they are also working on excavators and other construction machines. I'm sure all the big manufacturers are. If you think about it, a workday battery charge on one charge could be done. The weight is not really an issue because you have counterbalance weights already, dead weight in these excavators. So so it's more maybe space and definitely cost. Another issue is that construction sites are often without charging infrastructure. And here, again, you can have stationary fuel cells for charging, for instance, or built in on the machine. So aircraft, and this is some area which is really got a lot of attention. What you can do here is that you can burn hydrogen directly in the engines. It doesn't require that much change in the propulsion system, really. However, the hydrogen storage system is problematic, especially for long haul. The reason is that energy density is very low of hydrogen. It's about 1/3 of that of kerosene. You need to have almost 3 times as big tanks, although the hydrogen is much lighter. But volume also means drag. But Airbus points at this for short and medium range aircraft. You can say for aircraft, battery is hardly relevant. You can really just realistically come maybe a few tenths of such a few hundreds of kilometers. Especially since you need reserves, you need to be able to reach alternative airports, and you have to have 45 minutes extra loitering time. So this is really almost impossible, I would say, at least in the medium range, medium term, like 10 years or so. This is, by the way, Airbus concepts already from 2001. This is not how they look today, but you see the consequences of the hydrogen storage, because you have a long tank on top of the aircraft, which make it really bulky. And nowadays they're talking more, I would say, about synthetic fuels. So fuel cells then have lower power density, which make them useful only for slow aircraft. Think about this BG Racer. You really need to have a big fuel cells to get fast, and you don't want that. So it would be for so far only for slow aircraft, maybe commuters. And they have to compete head-on with hydrogen burning aircraft of comparable efficiency. The business case then have to be built on secondary aspects, for instance, maintenance. I like to finish off with a comparison of CO2 producers, just to put them in perspective to each other. In Sweden, people flying both in Sweden but also to and from Sweden produce about 10 million tons of CO2. In aviation, we see that kerosene can be replaced by hydrogen, or either by burning it directly in the engines or by fuel cells and electric motors for small aircraft. We can also, for long haul, maybe have synthetic fuel, so it's called synfuel. The car we use in Sweden typically produce about 10 million tons CO2 per year. Here, I think in 10 years we will see a major shift to battery, really. Comparing that this can also be compared to steel production. SSAB has direct CO2 emissions about 9.8 million tons of CO2 from the steel production. That can be replaced by that can be produced by hydrogen instead, and that means that the CO2 will only be a fraction of what we have now. Heavy road transports is about 5 million tons of CO2. Here we can see a combination of batteries and hydrogen fuel cells to make them more CO2 neutral. Work machines is about 3.5 million tons CO2. Here we can also see a transition to battery and hydrogen fuel cells. Ships to and from Sweden is also something people rarely talk about. That's about as much as the flying in cars. Here we can see transition to hydrogen, either burn or in fuel cells or by synthetic fuels. So thank you for your attention.